Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Christine Dixon of the Ordinary Sacred, and today I am really excited to go over the second chapter of Outshining Trauma by Ralph De La Rosa. And if you want to check out the last video on the introduction in chapter one, you can go back and check that out if you want. Whether you're following along with the book or you're just hearing from me, is no problem. If you are following along with the book and you want to share some things that I don't share, or you have questions, please feel free to put them in the comments. And if um, you're just following along with what I'm saying, you're welcome to also put them in the comments and kind of interact in the book club in that way as well. So, I loved chapter two. There were a couple different things in this chapter that resonated so deeply with my experience with IFS that it felt like the puzzle pieces coming together and going, yes, yes, yes. The way that Ralph explained things, um, just felt really validating to my system and just I don't even know the right word to express it. It was like uh maybe experiences that I've had that I have struggled to try to articulate. He explained so quickly and effortlessly, and I said, yes, yes, this is it. So one of them has to do with firefighters, and then stay to the end for the biggest one for me. It's he answers why I feel like I and he have been able to do IFS on ourselves within our own systems, right? And there are lots and lots of people who come to IFS and are not able to do that. And it's to no fault of their own. And a lot of practitioners and therapists will say you absolutely have to have someone walk you through it. But to me, there's this reason why it's not that necessarily we're just these special people. It has to do with the path that we took before we met IFS. And I talked about that a little bit in the last video that I'm going to explain. He explains the qualities of the self and how there really is kind of this method, uh, practical method of easing into allowing the system to have more and more access to self. And so I'm going to explain that at the end. But I'm not going to go through every single thing in this chapter. So I do encourage you to get the book. It's wonderful. Um, at the beginning, Ralph talks about this analogy of our inner system being like a record player. And he tells this story of when was he 8? Oh no, he was 4. And he was at a friend's house and he dismantled their brand new state-of-the-art record player, took apart all the parts because he was so fascinated by all these little pieces and how they fit together and how is the music coming out of this physical thing? How is it on that record? Where's the music? And so he took apart all the pieces trying to find the music. And it's still a mystery, but he likened it to all of our parts, that we have all of these intricate little parts that really create the whole and together create this beautiful music of harmony. When all of the pieces are unburdened and are kind of having their own roles and in their place and working together, right, to create the music. And if one of them gets broken or gets you know stressed or comes apart from the whole or whatever, right? It needs to lovingly be brought back in. Anyway, the analogy falls apart at some point, but I thought it was a great one. He also talks about the body as an analog. Um, Something I liked also, he talks about how to recognize parts. And he says they can come as thoughts that are in words, thoughts that are in images, bodily sensations, and emotions. And this reminds me of something that I learned from, I think it was Dan Siegel. He talks about SIFT. I think it's sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts. right? And that's what we can give our kind of loving compassion and attention to, right? So there's all these modalities that in many ways are forms of IFS. Now, IFS takes it a step further because it really says, when someone says, I am giving my sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts loving attention. Well, who's having the sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts, right? A lot of times people will say, I am loving myself, right? But having the image of, I am made up of all of these parts that are having these different experiences, and the core of me, myself, can give them loving attention. It's a relationship, it's a coming together of the self and the parts. And without that language of multiplicity, it's really hard. I'm constantly translating what people are saying. And when they say, don't let yourself uh, question your actions or something like that, right? It's like, okay, don't let a part of you question the actions of another part of you, right? But when you don't have the language of multiplicity, it just comes out, I question myself about this, and then I get angry, but it's really different parts inside that are having those experiences. And there's one who can give them all loving attention and can actually help them and heal them. So, and then I, I don't know if you all know this, but I actually wrote a book 10 years ago. I think it was 10 years ago. It's called Choosing Stillness, Knowing Love. And in it, I have all these, it's like how to have a stillness practice. And the first thing is a step, and it stands for sensations, thoughts, emotions, and pictures, I guess, and to observe them with loving attention, right? To create the stillness so that you can observe them with loving attention. And now, when I lead IFS groups, I often will say pets, right? Because your physical sensations, emotional energy, and thoughts, and they may come in words or images, whichever way your thoughts come to you. And that makes it easy, right? The pets inside of you. But the pets are really aspects of the parts of us, right? And how they're manifesting and what they want to be seen and what's coming up. And so even back then, 10 years ago, before I met IFS, I realized that there were these pieces of creating space for stillness, um, which is nothingness, to just be still and observe whatever is alive in me and to bring compassionate witness to that. That's why you'll hear me say this probably more than anything else, is that healing always occurs in this moment as I bring loving attention to whatever is alive in me right now. And that's all we ever have to do is be here now with what's alive in us now. We don't have to have a plan for all forever. Sometimes things that are stuck in the past get alive in us now. We get activated or triggered, right? So they're alive in us now. That window of consolidation opens again, and we can bring loving, compassionate witness to that. But it's happening right now, and everything's always happening right now. All right. So I kind of liked that. Also, he talks about expressing needs, which, if you know, I love to combine internal family systems and nonviolent communication, which is really needs-based communication. When we are observing our pets, our physical sensations, emotional energy, and thoughts, whatever is arising, we observe them without judgment, just and without needing to fix them, but we just want to understand them, get curious about what is the need underneath, right? And I often will say that when a part gets activated, so there's big physical sensation going on, big emotional energy, or like racing thoughts, right? I say when that's happening on the surface, we're looking for the TNT underneath, which is unhealed trauma, unmet needs, or untrue thoughts. And really, the untrue thoughts are often the burdens that are held by the parts who've experienced trauma or cultural conditioning, legacy burdens, things like that. So the untrue thoughts are kind of the burdens of parts, unhealed trauma that parts are stuck back in, or their unmet needs. And often part of the trauma was that our young parts had needs that went unmet. And when that window of consolidation opens, we can go back into them and meet their needs and redo that scene, which is just so miraculous that we can do that. Okay, now I'm not going to read the examples. Maybe another time I will because they're excellent. But I love that Ralph De La Rosa has specific examples. He has George's career choice and then Rochelle's difficulty driving. And these are clients of his and exactly how he worked with them. To me, this is one of the most valuable things in a book in teaching is giving very specific examples that people can see exactly how IFS works in a real life situation. Maybe sometime I'll come back and read one of these because it is really helpful. But I want to get through and get to the the epiphany I had at the end of the chapter. So he in this chapter is doing the basic explanation of managers, exiles, firefighters, um, and self. And he does an excellent job. Now, a lot of times when books go over this, my parts are like, oh, yeah, yeah, we know all this. Let's skim over it. But I found myself, you know, after much more than 10,000 hours of IFS, uh, engaged with how he was describing it. It felt really fresh to me. One of the things that I really appreciated that he says about firefighters, and again, I don't know if this is controversial at all, um, but sorry, let me put this down so I can use my hands. I feel I'm like trying to hold the book down, but I want to use my hands to talk. So, um, I often hear people describe firefighters as, parts that hold addiction, rage, um, self-harm, um, numbing, dissociating, things like that, that are kind of culturally unacceptable and, have a stigma around them, usually are quote unquote shameful. But the way Ralph describes firefighters is my experience. He explains that this fight or flight, freeze, fawn response is all firefighters. This was the first time that I heard someone explain that the people-pleasing part, the fawning part, is a firefighter. Now, I do believe that it can also be a manager, that it can, because it's about timing, right? It's, is it doing it to prevent pain or is it doing it once like threat and pain is coming up? But initially, this response is if someone in front of us is acting threatening to us, we have parts that come up that are afraid of that, of getting activated. So then we go into appease mode. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, no. Of course. Right. And we have that fawn response after the threat level comes up, right? After those flames kind of come up, the firefighter comes in to try to put them down, try to ease the situation. Now, he also says, and this again, I have said this before, and there's a part of me that goes, this is different than what most people teach, Christine. But I say, but this is my experience, is that our inner critics can also be firefighters. This is so my experience, is that when I have a really tender, sensitive um, exile named Chrissy, that's 4 to 5 years old, not 45, 4 or 5, a young girl, and she holds all of my tenderness and sensitivity, and often has really, really big emotions. And when she comes up, I have such big, even destroyer, you know, firefighters that are critics, very harsh critics that are like, you pathetic, terrible thing. You're a burden. Stop it. Get down. Get out of here. You deserve to die, right? And so those parts, those big inner critics, for me, my experience was always that they were firefighters because they would swoop in when Chrissy would get activated, right? And so I loved his just acknowledgement. And again, not all critics are firefighters, but for me, my especially my biggest critics are definitely firefighters. They come in after pain has been and vulnerability especially has been activated. So I really loved that he just acknowledged that. Um, Okay, a couple quick things before I get to the main thing I want to talk about. Um, on page, let's see, back on page 34, I really liked this insight. It's in a box and it says, anxiety is often the byproduct of parts having a lot to repress in the name of functioning. Anxiety is rarely a primary emotion, but rather the outcome of having lots of other emotions and thoughts that certain parts of us feel we cannot allow to surface. Anxiety is often not held by parts so much as it is a feeling generated by parts when they feel stressed about holding it together. Again, I loved this because, again, there's all kinds of possibilities. We can have anxious parts that really believe that they're hyperfixation, hypervigilance, or belief in worst case scenario are helping us in some way, right? So kind of their anxiety kind of is their job. But a lot of that feeling of anxiety in our bodies is, for me, it's often this bracing, this holding back of parts of me that are feeling authentic emotion. And if you think about that, like it's like this spring of water is pushing itself up out of the ground, and there's something holding it down, holding, right? And so that tension that happens where something wants to come up and the other parts are holding it down, right? There's just a lot of tension in that. So a lot of times when we're describing anxiety, and for me, the feeling of that is like an irritability, right? It's like, and there's a tension. You can see me gritting my teeth and clenching my fists and holding my muscles, right? So a lot of times our bodies will hold the emotion in, and that creates anxiety. It creates tension in our muscles and other symptoms from doing that for a long time. And that's why creating a system in which there's more and more allowance for that compassionate witness to come in. And even if it's, I liken it to a pressure cooker, right? Because it's like that, that geyser is threatening to come up to the surface and everybody's working to hold it down because they're afraid it's just going to explode, right? Like if you open a pressure cooker, it will explode. But if you've ever used a pressure cooker, when you release the pressure at the end, you open a little valve and it just comes out just a little, right? So once the system learns that there is compassionate witness that can meet that pressure that's released, they can experiment with opening the valve just a little bit, releasing the emotion, the grief, the anger, and just let it be held and be allowed by someone who's bigger than it, who can hold an untroubled space for it. And then once that's released, the pressure that these are, equal and opposite pressure to push it down, they can relax. And then we feel much less tension, much less irritability, much less holding it in our bodies, right? So that's why it's so beneficial to us. physically, mentally, all the things. Um, okay. So last thing is Ralph talks about the self. And I hope you stayed for this part because this was so wonderful to me. And I might even make a whole video just about this. But he's just, in my mind's eye of him teaching this very nonchalantly, talking about the qualities of self. But he says that, well, first let me tell you the order of the way I learned the qualities of self, and I imagine he did as well. And the order to me always felt important. Now, a lot of people, even Dick, they'll just kind of say the C's that they remember kind of thing. But for me, I remembered the order felt important to me. I remembered them. There's 8 qualities. I imagined them 4 over here and 4 over here, and then in groups of 2. So the way I remembered them was was calm, clear, curious, compassionate, confident, courageous, creative, connected. Okay, I'm going to show you a slide so you can see all of these. But these are the 8 C's of self, right? And then there's also the P's, presence, playfulness, patience, perspective, and persistence. And there's so many other words. Wisdom, um, stability, groundedness. It's a feeling state. It's not defined just by these words. But what I loved is, and I'm going to share my screen for this. I actually made, I made this in Canva, and it's not very good. I did it really quickly, but and this is just my Canvas screen here. Let me make myself bigger so you can see me a little bit better. Okay, so the 8 C's of self, and these are in order, kind of the way I said them: calm, clarity, curiosity, compassion. I'll tell you why I made this big. Confidence, courage, creativity, and connectedness. And I have them kind of on this bridge because as Ralph was explaining this, I thought of this archway, and at the top is compassion. Because, like Ralph says, when that window of consolidation reopens, it is the compassionate witness, the compassionate witness that is what brings healing into that situation. Because we didn't have that back then during the trauma. And now we're bringing it in, what was needed, so that we can be mobilized to do whatever we need to do um, to redo the situation. So what I love that Ralph shares is he calls the first 3, calm, clarity, and curiosity, he calls them the seedlings of the pivotal 4th C, compassion. Okay, so he calls these the seedlings. I like that word. And then he calls the last 4, courage, confidence, creativity, and connection, or I usually say confidence and courage. Um, he calls those the outcome qualities. Okay, so these are the seedling qualities, and these are the outcome qualities. And what I love about this is, again, it just so resonates with my experience, but that there is a path. Now, I do think you can enter into self-compassion through any of these doors. I'm sorry, through to self-energy through any of these doors. Um, but this path is exactly my experience. Um, so I'll describe it a little here, and then I'll take the image off and describe it more. But for me, I told you I wrote the book called Choosing Stillness, Knowing Love, and I was just thinking the other day that might add the word choose, because there's this will, this volition, this empowerment that I am going to choose to step in to self energy and to even realize that I have a choice to do that. And now, often at the beginning, it is an experiment for our parts to choose So I would say maybe the step before calm is choose. I'm going to choose calmness, which I called stillness, right? But I'm going to choose to have space to do nothing. Now, for me, I was telling my partner Brian this yesterday. I would say the very beginning of all my healing can be traced back to getting Martha Beck's book, The Joy Diet, from the library. Now, there were some steps before that to even allow me to read Martha Beck's book because I had so many religiously burdened parts that wouldn't even let me do that before. But once I got her book, it's kind of like this recipe for joy. And the first ingredient, the first step, is what she calls nothing. Now, because of my religious burdens, I would have not allowed, or parts of me who were taught that meditation was evil would not have allowed me to practice or experiment even with meditation. But because she didn't call it that, she called it doing nothing, which I now understand is meditation. Um, I was okay trying it, right? So I remember her recommendation was for 10 minutes, and I would try so hard to do nothing for 10 minutes. And it is incredibly difficult because our systems are so used to our parts running the show and being in the driver's seat and going and going and doing and not stopping because that's how they keep us safe, right? And they're used to running the show. They don't want nothing to happen. They don't want that stillness and space because the exiles will come up, right? The parts that genuinely feel sad or afraid or angry are going to come up, and we've got to keep a lid on that, right? So it's very threatening for a lot of our parts to even choose stillness or calm. And so what I would say, what I always try to tell people, start with as little amount of time as your system will allow. It could be 2 seconds. One, two, right? Just that little bit of space, right? I also remember back in the day, the Viktor Frankl quote of between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is your choice and your freedom. So it's gradually lengthening that space. And not because you should, you have to, you're bad if you don't, but just to experiment and try it and see if it's helpful to you or not. Okay. And if your parts are really threatened by it, again, just say whatever amount you'll allow. We'll count to three and just be still for 3 seconds and take one breath. Or maybe they'll allow you to experiment at times with a little bit more and see what happens. Okay. So the entryway into self, in my experience, is starting with an experiment, but a choice to create space for stillness and calm, nothingness, open space. Okay. In that space, when we create space for this, and at the time I would also call it presence because right after Martha's book, I read Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now and A New Earth and blew my mind. My parts were so used to being active, if not physically, mentally, right? Just thoughts all the time. I was never fully here now in this moment. And it was overwhelming to my system at first because I started to see miracles everywhere. This is where my name, the Ordinary Sacred, comes from because I started practicing it in the bathroom and I started seeing the trees outside and the design of everything around me as sacred. It was just overwhelming to me that once I was still, I was present, I saw miracles everywhere. Okay. And so when we stop to be still, we begin to have clarity. It's a natural result. Now, the clarity might be, I am in pain. I am grieving. I'm so, so sad, right? Like some people would say, when I stop to be still, Christine, I just start crying and crying. I say, oh, okay. What that means is that you are sad, right? There's a part of you that's very sad. Or some people would say, every time I stop to be still, Christine, I fall asleep. Now, that could be one of two things. It could be that pain was coming up and a part had to shut it down by putting you to sleep, or it might just mean your body is very tired. And when you stop to be still, you notice the truth. You have clarity about what the truth is inside of you and even around you as you look around you in this moment. Okay? So the calm, the choice for the stillness, the calm leads to clarity. And as you gain that clarity, as you're like, man, every time I stop to be still, I cry. Every time I stop to be still, I fall asleep. Every time I stop to be still, I feel like a buzzing in my chest and my throat, or whatever it is. You begin to get curious because this place of stillness is just, there's no fixing, there's no doing anything. So all you're left with is just to be curious, right? To be open and non-judgmental and to say, hmm, I wonder why I, when I'm still, I cry. Wonder why my body is so tired. I wonder what that buzzing is about, right? And as you begin to get curious about it, and you're still in this space of kind of just observing and making room for whatever is there, those parts will begin showing you as you're just open and curious with them. They will show you, I'm sad because um, my mom is in the hospital again. This is a true thing. And I can't be there. And I feel overwhelmed about it. And they'll start telling you exactly why they're feeling that way. Or um, I saw this meme and it activated a part of me from that disagreed with it, but thought it was I was wrong and bad, and so I'm feeling shame or something. I don't know. Like the parts will begin to like make more and more clear the picture. Okay, so now all of these are growing in the space of calm. You just naturally have more clarity. You feel more curious, and then the parts give you more information, and you feel more clear. And then when you clearly see the suffering of the parts in front of you that are feeling sad, overwhelmed, tense, afraid, you cannot help but feel compassion. It's as if there is another person in front of you who's expressing their very genuine pain and suffering, and you go toward them in this loving compassion. I feel for your suffering and I am here for you and I love you, right? So, this is the natural progression once we make a choice to have stillness, to have calm. And that's why I wrote the book, Choosing Stillness, Knowing Love, because the choice for stillness is at the bottom of this path. The love, the compassion is at the top of the path. And then after that, all of the rest are just these byproducts. Um, what does he call them? I know I just said it, but I forgot. But they're basically byproducts, right? They just naturally flow. They are outcomes, the outcomes, the outcome qualities. So once you've kind of gone up this path and you enter into really the fullness, I think, of self, which is compassion, you naturally feel confident that your unconditional love for these parts of you that are feeling sad, anxious, angry, whatever, pain, uh, is what they need and is what will help them. You're not afraid of these parts or these emotions overtaking you. There's confidence, there's courage around being with them, not being afraid of them. And then once you have fully witnessed these parts and offered compassion, naturally what flows in is creativity, is the self is able to problem solve and offer ideas and offer experiments without efforting at all. It just naturally comes flowing. Creativity is a flowing nature, right? And it begins to offer this. And like I said in the last video, only when the parts are ready for the help, for the creative solutions, not anytime sooner, right? That this is what naturally begins flowing from the self. And there's just natural connectedness when the parts who are feeling all these things feel the compassionate witness of the self. You see my hands, there is connection. They feel connected with the self, and it is in that connection that they are healed and they begin to gain trust and can redo their situations, and they feel a secure attachment, a secure connection with the self from which they can take risk and do other experiments, creative, try creative things. Let's see, I said more than I thought I was on this, but let me go ahead and stop sharing. Okay, so if you are still here, again, I might make a video itself on this because I don't know if people have listened to this point to this, but maybe I'll make a video with more specifics because I really want to flesh this out of what it looks like. And again, every person's path is different. So I don't mean to say your path needs to be like mine or like Ralph's, right? But what was just so exciting to me was as Ralph was describing this, I thought that was my path exactly. And he was able to do IFS on himself. I was able to do IFS on myself. And so, what if it would be helpful for people to say, and I mean, I do say this all the time anyway, but kind of more explicitly, like, start here. This is the beginning of the path. You don't have to be in, will yourself to be in compassion and courage and creativity and connectedness. What if you just started with an experiment of choosing to be still and create space for calm nothingness, presence, and observation for 2 seconds, 5 seconds, however much your system will allow. And then I always tell people increase, like do that every day, whatever the lowest amount your system will allow. Say you're doing it for 5 seconds a day. And then like have a specific time that you do that. And then you increase it when your system wants to. There's no pushing or making you do it at all. That would be another part. But what I found in my experience was gradually, because I started with the 10 minutes and my system was like, I cannot do this. And my mind would just wander and I would, do all this stuff. So I began starting with 10 seconds. And then I gradually increased and increased because my system found such nourishment from it. And I began to, instead of it feeling like a chore, oh, I gotta go meditate or I gotta go sit in stillness, it was, ooh, I get to go do this. It felt like, I often say this, but like I was a deep sea diver and I was going to dive under the water into the ocean and see what was there in this moment and observe it. It was fascinating to me. Oh, wow, there's a part feeling dejected over here. I wonder why. Let me get my mask and go close to it and say, what's happening with you? Tell me about it. I have a part that's excited and elated about something over here. Ooh, tell me about you, right? And it was like I was just exploring my inner terrain with curiosity for whatever time my system felt like it was okay to do. And then gradually, that was at a specified time each day. Then gradually what happened was my parts would get activated, uh, not at that designated time. And I would have parts whose default was to fight or flee or fawn or whatever, all those things. But then another part would say, hey, hey, remember what would happen when we would do this stillness? Like, what if we try that right now? What if we go to a private space, the bathroom or something, and put my hand on my heart and just say, oh, oh, honey, I'm here with you. I see your suffering. I'm here with you. Tell me about it. What do you want me to know? Right? What if we tried that in these big moments and not for an hour, for 10 minutes even, just for 30 seconds. And then I began to do 90 seconds because that's the amount of time it takes for an emotion to rise and fall. So I would set my timer and do an experiment to see if my system would allow it. Can I bring compassionate witness and open the pressure cooker for 90 seconds? And they began to get evidence. Oh my gosh, this is amazing because then the parts aren't like going like this anymore. They're relaxed because they got compassionate witness and it only took us 90 seconds, you know? So they started to get more and more, gain more and more trust um, that if I chose stillness without any agenda, I would gain clarity, move toward with curiosity, and compassion would be my natural um, response. So, anyway, I hope you appreciate that. My system was so excited about it. And if you have any questions about anything I shared in this video or any comments, please leave them in the comments below. And next week, I'm excited to go over chapter 3. Oh, and I'll announce the winner of the book probably before this video comes out, actually. If you won the book, congratulations.